He only realized she had become unforgettable when strangers turned away from him to watch her arrive. Callum Ashford stood beneath the glass awning of the Harrington Grand in Manhattan, wearing a midnight tuxedo and the practiced smile of a man who had spent years turning ambition into performance. Rain slipped down the edges of the awning in thin silver lines, and the wet red carpet reflected every gold hotel light as if the whole city had been polished for his success. Beside him, Celeste Vaughn held her champagne-colored gown with one careful hand. Her blonde hair swept into a flawless twist, her smile angled toward the photographers who called her name with the easy excitement reserved for beauty that knew how to stand beneath a flash. Callum had planned this evening down to the last handshake. The investors were inside. The reporters were waiting. The new national division of Ashford Bennett Group would be announced before midnight, and by morning, his name would appear in business columns beside words like expansion, leadership, and vision. For months, he had told himself this gala was not only a professional triumph. It was proof. Proof that the choices people whispered about had been necessary. Proof that the woman he left behind had belonged to a smaller version of his life. Proof that the future he chose was better than the past he abandoned. Then the black Bentley stopped at the curb. At first, Callum noticed only the car, glossy and silent beneath the rain, another expensive arrival among many. The doorman stepped forward with an umbrella. The rear door opened. A single black heel touched the wet pavement, and Zariah Ellison stepped out as if the night had been waiting for her. She wore an ivory coat over a floor-length black gown, the fabric moving with the calm grace of something too quiet to beg for attention. Her natural curls were pinned with small gold accents that caught the hotel lights, and her dark skin glowed warm against the rain-washed silver of Manhattan. She did not look nervous. She did not pause to search the crowd. She did not lift her chin in defiance or lower it in hesitation. She simply stood, composed and complete, while the camera flashes began turning in her direction one by one. Celeste felt the shift before Callum spoke. Her fingers tightened lightly around his sleeve, just enough for him to notice. "Is that your ex-wife?" she asked, still smiling as if the question were harmless. Callum opened his mouth, but the answer never arrived. Because another man stepped out of the Bentley behind Zariah, tall and composed in a charcoal tuxedo, silver at his temples, his presence quiet enough to make the crowd adjust itself around him. Alastair Rowan. Even before anyone said his name, the entrance changed temperature. Executives straightened. Conversations softened. Men who measured themselves in buildings and funds suddenly looked careful. Alastair did not move ahead of Zariah. He did not touch her as if she were an ornament beside him. He only offered his arm, and when she accepted it, the gesture carried the ease of respect practiced in private long before it was witnessed in public. Callum watched them begin their walk toward the ballroom, and something colder than jealousy moved through him. Recognition. 5 years earlier, he had left Zariah in a Chicago apartment with 2 suitcases, a folded divorce packet, and a silence he thought would keep her small. He had walked away believing she would become a footnote to the life he was building. Now she was crossing the wet red carpet beside one of the most powerful men in the room, not rescued, not displayed, not trying to prove anything. The woman he had erased from his future had entered it anyway, and without saying a single word, she had already taken the night from him. 5 years earlier, before Manhattan rain turned the red carpet into a mirror, before Alastair Rowan offered Zariah his arm beneath a hotel awning, before Callum Ashford felt an entire room shift away from him, there had been an apartment above the Chicago River where everything looked beautiful except the truth. It sat on the 24th floor of a glass tower downtown, with pale stone floors, quiet elevators, and windows so tall the city seemed to enter every room without asking. From the outside, their marriage looked like one of those framed stories people believed in because the lighting was right. A rising corporate attorney, a graceful wife beside him, charity dinners, polished photographs, holiday cards mailed on thick cream paper. Inside, Zariah knew the cost of that picture. She was the one who stayed up after midnight with Callum's legal briefs spread across the dining table, catching missing dates, smoothing rough arguments, reheating coffee he forgot to drink. She was the one who remembered client birthdays, sent thank-you notes to partners' spouses, chose his ties before hearings, and stood near ballroom walls while he practiced becoming important. In the beginning, he noticed. When he won his first major case, he came home with cheap champagne from a corner store because they were still counting dollars then, and he laughed as the cork tapped the ceiling. "We did it," he said, pulling her close in the kitchen. Zariah believed him because his voice still had room for her inside it. Years later, the word "we" began disappearing in small, clean cuts. He said "my firm," then "my contacts," then "my future," as if the life beneath those words had assembled itself without her hands. He stopped asking about her consulting projects. At dinners, he corrected her gently, smiling as though he were helping, while guests looked down at their plates. He became careful with his phone, turning it face down whenever Celeste Vaughn's name lit the screen. Celeste was all brightness and angles, a model whose photographs appeared at fashion benefits and rooftop launches, a woman who made Callum feel watched in the way he had learned to confuse with being valued. Zariah did not accuse him at first. She watched. She listened to the pauses. She saw how he checked his reflection before answering messages, how he wore cologne to meetings that used to require only a file folder, how he came home carrying applause but no tenderness. The end came on a cold Friday evening in late November. The river below their apartment looked black beneath the bridges, and a navy suitcase lay open on the bed with his cufflinks already packed. Callum stood by the window in a gray suit, composed, almost relieved. He did not shout. He did not plead. He simply said he needed a life that matched where he was going. Zariah looked at the wedding portrait on the dresser, then at the man who had mistaken her loyalty for weight. "Is she part of that life?" she asked. He looked away, and the room answered for him. By Tuesday afternoon, a doorman carried her boxes to the curb. Zariah stood with 2 suitcases, 1 leather tote, and no key to the apartment she had turned into a home. The wind came hard off the river, sharp enough to make her eyes water, but she did not call after him. She only lifted the suitcase handle, stepped onto the sidewalk, and walked away from the life he thought she would never survive losing. The first home Zariah could afford after the divorce did not feel like a fresh start. It felt like a receipt. A third-floor walk-up above a dry cleaner on the west side of Chicago, narrow stairs, old wood, pale walls, and 1 window facing a brick wall close enough to make morning look borrowed. The first night, she slept on a mattress on the floor beneath a quilt her Aunt Denise had brought over in a brown paper bag. 2 suitcases stood near the door. 1 leather tote leaned against the counter. 1 mug, 1 plate, 1 fork. Everything she owned could be counted without opening a drawer. Outside, a delivery truck backed into the alley at 6:15 every morning. 3 sharp beeps that became her alarm before she could afford a real one she liked. At first, Zariah thought the hardest part would be the silence. It was not. The hardest part was the empty closet. No coats beside hers. No cufflinks on the dresser. No familiar scent of cedar, cologne, and dry cleaning. Just a metal rod stretching across the dark, waiting for a woman who had been removed from one life before she had learned how to stand inside another. She did not cry over Callum that night. She cried because she had forgotten to buy hangers. Then she wiped her face, closed the closet door gently, and made a list on the back of a grocery receipt. Hangers, coffee, resume update, certification payment, groceries under $40. By morning, she was in the least wrinkled blazer she owned, curls tied back with a black ribbon, old laptop. Tucked into a canvas bag, she took the Blue Line downtown for a temporary consulting role that paid less than Callum once spent on a private dinner for 4. No one there knew she had lived above the river. No one knew she had edited legal briefs at 2 in the morning, hosted partners with a graceful smile, or remembered deadlines that were never hers to carry. To them, she was Miss Ellison, contract analyst, desk near the printer, polite voice, steady hands. She let that be enough. At lunch, she sat outside with coffee cooling between her palms, reading case studies from the public library app on her phone while buses sighed along the curb. At night, she studied market analytics, real estate finance, and brand strategy until the radiator hissed louder than the instructor's voice. Some evenings, she passed restaurants where she used to wait for Callum while he turned strangers into contacts. Warm light, white tablecloths, men laughing over wine lists she once pretended not to hear. The ache would rise, familiar and rude. Soraya would keep walking. Week by week, the apartment changed. Hangers clicked into the closet. A basil plant appeared on the windowsill. A second mug sat beside the first, not for company, but because she wanted a choice. She sold the diamond earrings from their third anniversary and used the money for certification fees. By spring, her reports were being forwarded upstairs. By summer, a senior manager asked who built the risk model everyone was quoting. By fall, her name appeared on a presentation she had completed alone. The brick wall still filled the window. The stairs still creaked. The delivery truck still woke her before sunrise. But Soraya no longer heard those sounds as proof of what she had lost. They had become the rhythm of what she was building, one disciplined morning at a time. Soraya met Alastair Rowan on a Tuesday afternoon when Chicago rain made the windows of the consulting firm look like sheets of moving silver. It was almost 4:30, the hour when office lights felt too white and most people had already begun saving drafts instead of finishing thoughts. Conference room 7 smelled faintly of printer toner and cold coffee. Soraya sat alone at the long glass table with her laptop open, a yellow highlighter uncapped beside her hand, and the Lakeshore redevelopment file spread out in front of her like a puzzle someone important had assembled badly. The project had been passed down twice before landing on her desk with a note that said, "Clean up assumptions before client review." She had not cleaned them up. She had taken them apart. The occupancy forecast was too generous by 11%. The retail revenue projection ignored 2 nearby vacancies and a competing development less than 1 mile away. The contingency reserve looked less like caution and more like decoration. She was circling a number in red when the glass door opened. A man stood in the doorway wearing a navy overcoat darkened at the shoulders by rain, silver at his temples, one leather folder tucked beneath his arm. He did not enter like a man expecting the room to recognize him. He paused, polite and still. "I apologize," he said, his voice low and even. "I was told this room was open." Soraya gathered the top page as if she had been trained by disappointment to make space quickly. "It is. I can move." His eyes went to the screen before they went to her badge. Not dismissively, carefully. "Is that Lakeshore?" She paused. Most executives saw slides. He had seen the problem. "Yes," she said. "The model overstates stabilized occupancy by 11%. A clean silence settled between them. "That is a very specific objection," he said. "It is a very expensive mistake," Soraya answered before fear had time to make the sentence smaller. He stepped inside and asked if he could see the assumption sheet. For 20 minutes, she walked a stranger through the weaknesses of a deal worth more than anything she had ever touched, expecting at any moment for him to interrupt, correct her, or ask for someone senior. He did none of those things. He listened. He wrote notes by hand. He asked questions that made the room feel sharper instead of smaller. When her manager finally rushed in, face flushed, calling him Mr. Rowan with the breathless respect people reserved for men whose signatures moved markets, Soraya understood who had been standing across from her. Alastair Rowan, chairman of Rowan Global Holdings, the client no one wanted to disappoint. Her manager reached for the presentation, eager to reclaim the room, but Alastair placed one calm hand on the back of a chair and said, "I would like Miss Ellison to finish." No compliment. No rescue. No grand gesture. Just space. Zariah looked at the numbers, then at the people waiting to see whether she would shrink. She did not. She finished the analysis in a steady voice while rain blurred the skyline behind him. When the meeting ended, Alistair thanked everyone, then turned to her last. You saw the risk before the room wanted to admit it, he said. That matters. That evening, riding the blue line home with damp shoes and the folder pressed against her chest, Zariah watched the city lights streak past the window and realized something inside her had shifted. For the first time in years, someone powerful had looked at her and seen not who she had lost, not whose wife she had been, but what she knew. Recognition did not transform Zariah overnight. It worked more quietly than that, like a lamp left burning in a room she had forgotten was hers. After the Lakeshore meeting, her name began moving through the company in ways she could not see at first. A follow-up email from Alistair Rowan's office requested her full risk analysis, not the softened summary her manager had approved. Then came a calendar invitation to a strategy session on the 38th floor, where the elevators opened onto marble, the coffee arrived in porcelain cups, and people spoke in numbers large enough to change entire blocks of the city. Zariah arrived 10 minutes early in a black dress she had bought from an outlet store, her shoes polished at her kitchen table, her notebook opened before anyone else sat down. She expected to take notes along the wall. Instead, Alistair looked up from the head of the table and said, Miss Ellison, there is a seat beside finance. No one moved until he said it. After that, everyone moved. The months that followed were not glamorous. They were long, precise, and demanding. She took calls before sunrise with East Coast lenders, reviewed development schedules after dinner, and learned how powerful people disguised fear as optimism. A weak plan became ambitious. A missing safeguard became flexible. A warning became something to revisit next quarter. Zariah learned to let silence sit on the table until someone else became uncomfortable enough to tell the truth. She learned to speak once, clearly, and not apologize for being right. Her temporary contract became permanent. Her permanent role became senior. Her senior title became the name clients asked for before meetings began. At night, she still returned to the apartment above the dry cleaner, climbing 3 flights with grocery bags pressing lines into her palms. But the woman who opened that door no longer felt temporary. She bought a real desk. She replaced the folding chair. She framed her first signed project approval and hung it where a narrow bar of morning light could reach it. Alistair remained near her life without stepping into it too quickly. Sometimes he sent her market reports with one sentence attached. Page 7 is where the truth hides. Sometimes after meetings, he would ask, what did the room miss? He never asked her to be grateful. That may have been why his respect felt so unfamiliar. One winter evening after a board dinner on Michigan Avenue, snow fell softly against the restaurant windows. Zariah paused outside a place where she had once waited 40 minutes for Callum while he turned strangers into contacts at the bar. Alistair noticed the stillness in her face. Old memory, he asked. She looked at the warm lights, the polished silverware, the hostess stand where she had once smiled too patiently. An old version of me, she said. He did not offer sympathy. He only opened the car door and answered. Then we should not keep her waiting. By the 5th year, Zariah had a condo with west-facing windows, fresh flowers on Fridays, a reserved parking space, and a brass nameplate outside an office no one had given her out of kindness. She had earned it through risks named, forecasts corrected, rooms steadied, and decisions sharpened. She no longer checked Celeste's interviews. She no longer wondered whether Callum ever reached for his phone and thought of her. Hate required carrying him, and her hands were finally full of her own life. The invitation arrived on a Wednesday morning in a black envelope carried by a private courier in a dark suit. Zariah was in her office overlooking downtown Chicago, reviewing a capital proposal with a red pen in one hand and a cup of coffee cooling beside her keyboard. At first, She thought it was another donor dinner or industry reception, the kind of evening where people praise community while checking market updates beneath the table. Then she saw the cream card stock, the raised gold lettering, and the name printed beneath the seal, Ashford Bennett Group. For one quiet second, the city outside her window seemed to lose its sound. Callum's firm, his new national division, his carefully polished return to the kind of room he had always wanted to own. Zariah read the invitation once, then again, her thumb resting against the edge of the paper. 5 years ago, he had left Chicago with Celeste at his side and a story clean enough for business magazines. Now he was hosting a Manhattan gala at the Harrington Grand, surrounded by investors, attorneys, society editors, and men who believed a good tuxedo could make ambition look like character. Zariah placed the invitation on her desk and returned to the proposal as if the past had not just walked into her office wearing gold embossing. By noon, Alistair appeared at her doorway holding the same envelope between two fingers. He did not step inside until she looked up. "I assume yours arrived," he said. Zariah leaned back in her chair. "It did." He glanced at the invitation on her desk. "Ashford Bennett is seeking final backing through the Rowan Fund. They requested my attendance personally." His tone carried no judgment, which made the moment sharper. Zariah looked through the window at the city that had watched her disappear and rebuild. "Does he know I am connected to the recommendation?" Alistair's expression remained calm. "He knows enough to be polite, not enough to be careful." A faint smile touched her mouth, not pleasure, not revenge, something quieter than both. Alistair folded the envelope and lowered his hand. "You are under no obligation to enter a room that once made you feel small." Zariah looked at the black envelope, then at the brass nameplate beside her office door, then at the framed project approval hanging where afternoon light could reach it. She remembered the empty closet, the 3 flights of stairs, the first basil plant on the windowsill, the train rides with damp shoes, and the first time someone powerful had let her finish speaking. "I am not going there for him," she said. "I am going because my work belongs in that room." 3 weeks later, rain moved softly against the windows of her condo as she stood before the mirror in a floor-length black gown. Her natural curls were pinned with small gold accents. Her mother's pearl bracelet rested against her wrist. No armor, no costume, only a woman who no longer needed permission to be seen. Downstairs, a black car waited at the curb. When she stepped inside, Alistair closed the file in his lap and looked at her with quiet respect. "Ready?" he asked. Zariah turned toward the rain-lit city ahead. "Yes," she said, and this time, nothing in her voice trembled. By the time Zariah entered the Harrington Grand Ballroom, Callum had almost convinced himself that the moment outside had meant nothing. Powerful men survived awkward surprises by naming them interruptions, and he had spent years learning how to turn discomfort into posture. Inside, the room glowed with the disciplined beauty of Manhattan money. Crystal chandeliers over white orchids, tall windows reflecting the rain-bright skyline, polished silverware arranged like promises no one planned to keep. A string quartet played near the marble staircase while investors, attorneys, editors, and old family names moved through the room in tailored black and soft champagne. Callum stood near the center in a midnight tuxedo, one hand around a glass he had barely touched, Celeste beside him in a gown that made photographers turn as if trained by habit. They looked exactly the way his publicist wanted them to look. Successful, elegant, untouchable. Then the room began to lower its voice. Not dramatically, not all at once. Conversations simply softened near the entrance, one table at a time, as if attention were a current moving through the ballroom. Zariah walked in beside Alistair Rowan, and the space seemed to open before her without being asked. Her black gown followed her steps with quiet grace. The gold accents in her natural curls caught the chandelier light. Her expression held no challenge, no plea, no hunger to be noticed. That was what made people notice. Alistair did not guide her like a man presenting someone for approval. He matched her pace. When an investor approached him, he turned his body so Zariah remained inside the circle of conversation. When she spoke, he listened first, and everyone else followed the lesson. Callum watched that small exchange and felt an old sentence return to him. One he had once said in their Chicago kitchen when she asked why he never brought her into certain rooms anymore. It is complicated. He had called her quiet because he had never learned the difference between silence and depth. Celeste leaned closer, still smiling toward the room. She certainly learned how to make an entrance, she said softly. Callum tried to answer with amusement, but his throat tightened around it. Zariah's confidence was not borrowed from Alistair's wealth. It was not stitched into the gown or painted onto her face. It lived in the way she paused before speaking, the way executives leaned closer without being asked, the way she never once glanced at Callum to see whether he approved. Protocol finally forced him forward. He arranged his smile, crossed the short distance, and extended his hand. "Mr. Rowan," he said, "we are honored you could join us." Alistair shook his hand with polite precision. Callum, just his name. No warmth. No insult. Only accuracy. Then Callum turned to Zariah, and for one strange second the entire ballroom blurred around the woman he had once believed would remain behind him. "Zariah," he said, softer than he intended. "It has been a long time." She looked at him with calm recognition, as if he were a document she had already read, signed, and filed away. "It has." Celeste tilted her head, graceful and bright. "I almost did not recognize you." Zariah's gaze moved to her, civil enough for the room, cool enough for the truth. That happens when people only remember who they needed someone to be. The sentence did not rise above the music, but it landed with perfect weight. A nearby conversation thinned. Callum felt his polished smile tighten at the edges. Alistair looked at Zariah with quiet pride, not protection, not surprise, just recognition. Then the master of ceremonies called the guests toward the stage for the evening's announcement, and Callum turned with the crowd, telling himself the microphone would restore the room to him. But as Zariah passed, leaving behind the faint scent of jasmine and rain, he understood that some doors do not close loudly. Some close softly, while everyone is watching. The stage lights warmed slowly until the ballroom looked sealed inside gold, and Callum walked toward the microphone as if the floor still belonged to him. Behind him, the Ashford Bennett Group logo appeared in clean white letters on a wide screen, framed by images of city skylines, glass towers, courthouse steps, and development sites photographed at perfect angles. The applause rose exactly when it was supposed to rise. Callum smiled with the practiced ease of a man who had rehearsed gratitude in front of mirrors, thanking partners, investors, advisors, and everyone who had believed in the expansion from the beginning. His voice moved smoothly through the ballroom, polished enough to hide the strain gathering beneath it. He spoke of vision, resilience, national reach, and the courage to build what others only imagined. From the front row, Celeste watched with her chin lifted, beautiful and composed, but her attention kept drifting towards Zariah, as if the room's new gravity had become impossible to ignore. Zariah stood near the center aisle beside Alistair, hands relaxed, face calm, listening as Callum praised loyalty without once understanding what it had cost. For one passing second, his eyes found hers. He looked away before the sentence ended. Then the master of ceremonies returned with a sealed folder and a brighter smile. "Before we close tonight's announcement," he said, "we would like to recognize the strategic investment group making this expansion possible." A polite wave of interest moved through the tables. Callum straightened, ready for the expected mention of the Rowan Fund, ready for the photograph that would make tomorrow's business pages look inevitable. But the master of ceremonies turned toward the audience instead of the stage. "Please welcome the chairman of Rowan Global Holdings, Mr. Alistair Rowan." Applause filled the ballroom. Alistair stepped forward, buttoning his charcoal tuxedo jacket with one calm motion, and passed Callum without hurry. At the microphone, he thanked the hosts, the board, and the investment committee in a voice that did not need volume to command silence. Then he paused. His gaze moved to Zariah. Capital can open a door, he said, but judgment determines whether anyone should walk through it. This expansion required more than ambition. It required discipline, governance, and someone willing to question what pride wanted overlooked. The room grew still. Callum's smile remained, but it had become a place to hide. Alastair continued. The final investment recommendation was led by our senior strategic partner, Miss Zariah Ellison. Silence came first, because understanding needed a moment. Then applause began, not loud at once, but spreading table by table as heads turned toward her. Zariah walked to the stage with measured steps, her black gown moving quietly, the gold in her curls catching the chandelier light. Alastair stepped away from the microphone, giving her the center without claiming any part of it. Callum stood only a few feet from her, suddenly aware that the future he had tried to own had arrived under her name. Zariah looked across the investors, executives, assistants, and women standing along the walls with notebooks in hand. "Thank you," she said, her voice steady. "This partnership will proceed under revised governance, independent oversight, and a corrected risk structure. It will reward accountability over appearance." No accusation was made. No private history was exposed. Still, Callum heard every word as if it had been written for him. In that bright, elegant room, Zariah did not return to watch him lose. She returned because she had already become the person the room needed most. After Zariah stepped away from the microphone, the applause faded into something softer than celebration and sharper than silence. The ballroom tried to return to itself. The quartet resumed near the marble staircase. Waiters moved between tables with trays of sparkling water and untouched desserts. Guests lowered their voices into polished conversations, pretending they had not just watched a man's future rearrange itself around the woman he once dismissed. Callum remained near the edge of the stage, one hand in his pocket, the other resting around a glass he had not tasted all evening. His tuxedo was still perfect. His shoes still shone. His name still glowed across the screen behind him. Yet none of it seemed to belong to him with the same certainty anymore. Across the room, Zariah spoke with investors who leaned toward her as if every word carried weight. She did not look at Callum. She did not need to. That was what unsettled him most. If she had exposed him, he could have called it bitterness. If she had mocked him, he could have called it revenge. But her composure gave him nowhere to hide. Celeste stood beside him for a few minutes, her smile thinner now, her eyes following the attention that had moved away from them. Eventually, she drifted toward a photographer near the orchids, leaving Callum alone with the applause he had wanted and the emptiness it no longer covered. He watched Alastair approach Zariah with 2 glasses of sparkling water. Alastair waited until her conversation paused before offering one to her. It was a small gesture, almost nothing, but Callum saw what he had not understood 5 years earlier. Respect did not need to announce itself. It could stand quietly beside someone and still change the whole room. Near midnight, guests began moving toward the exits. Manhattan shimmered beyond the glass doors, wet with rain, yellow cabs passing like streaks of light beneath the hotel awning. Callum found Zariah in the marble corridor with her ivory coat folded over one arm, her mother's pearl bracelet catching the soft lobby light. For a moment, the noise around them thinned until only the rain seemed to remain. "Zariah," he said. She turned, calm as if his voice belonged to a distant season. "Callum." He swallowed, suddenly aware that charm had no place to stand here. "I did not know you were behind the recommendation." She looked at him, and the years between them gathered quietly. The suitcase, the empty closet, the third-floor walk-up, the blue-line mornings, the conference room where someone finally let her finish. "You did not know a lot of things about me," she said. There was no cruelty in her voice. That made it final. Callum nodded once, struggling to meet the grace he did not deserve. I was wrong. Zariah held his gaze for a breath. I know. Then Alistair returned, not to claim her, not to rescue her, only to stand beside the woman who had already chosen herself. The car is ready, he said gently. Zariah slipped into her coat and walked toward the doors. She did not look back. Outside, the doorman opened an umbrella above her, and the black Bentley waited at the curb. Alistair offered his arm. She accepted it with the ease of a woman stepping into a life she had earned. As the car pulled into the Manhattan rain, Callum stood beneath the awning surrounded by lights, money, and success that suddenly felt rented. He had not lost her that night. He had lost her years ago, in a bright apartment above the Chicago River, the moment he mistook her devotion for something ordinary. Zariah had not returned to win him back, punish him, or prove she was enough. She had returned as a woman who already knew. She did not win him back. She won herself,